Hi, welcome to the Triheart podcast. It is just Biffle Cup here. The boys are not present. And today we have Cass.
Cat. I'm sorry, I'm like, are
No,
you pausing?
you say it.
I'm Cass Cuttlefish. I'm a chiptune artist, like musician, and also I run a bit of chiptune, and I'm playing a big part in Infinite Lives.
And playing a huge part in the chiptune culture and the future of the chiptune culture.
Oh, thank you.
With featured music by a bit of chiptune artists. Interlaced in Hyperspace by Cass Cuttlefish. Egypt Funk by Wayfair Bakesaw. Nowhere to Be by Rat Riley. At the End of the Tunnel by Multi Polyphony. Jolt by Cross. 11Z3N by Leah. And Tarmageddon by Circuit Bend. So Cass, tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit of chiptune.
Yeah, I am a student taking classes in Carleton. I also make music using Family Tracker and also Ableton. So it's like a good little mix of modern and low tech style music. And other than that, me being trans definitely affects my life a lot. And I run a bit of chiptune, and a bit of chiptune is a collective, and I also like to think of it as kind of a movement. that releases a lot of music, runs a lot of events, and just generally tries to make chiptune be better and or the best that it can.
Yeah, you are great, and a bit of chiptune is great. There was this, I don't know if you posted it, but it was like a Captain Planet meme. I think it was was it for a bit of chiptune, or was it for?
It was for Infinite Lives. In the Infinite Lives like Discord, we have a little channel that we recently released called Nice Things People Say. So I actually have a photo of that. So it was posted by Breakbeat Heartbeat, and everyone with like the rings is like diverse lineups, all of the love in the world, the best chiptune music around, paying artists, supporting charity, and then the Captain Planet guy going like Infinite Lives.
Oh man, yeah. Captain Planet says, "With your powers combined, we." Actually, I forget the rest of that sentence. Yeah, it was such a good meme to kind of encapsulate what I find to be your platform. How would you describe the A Bit of Chiptune platform?
Yeah, we recently put out a little code of conduct, and it sort of like sums what we're all about into like 3 different interlocking branches called they're like creativity, diversity, and community. And those are all just kind of like the 3 pillars, I guess, that we kind of direct our decision making. And those are kind of our values. Of course, like Infinite Lives, all the things I mentioned, diverse lineups, good music, supporting charity, paying artists, doing all the good things.
How do you pick out the charities?
In between the different shows, we just look at a bunch of Black Lives Matter specific charities, and we pick out one, and it's just a different one every time, and it's pretty fun. I don't really have a list of all the ones that we've picked out, but it's a different one every time. On average, I'd say we like donate something over $600 each time, which I'm happy about. But like previously, it was like the Ochre Project, the Trevor Project. I think just like Black Lives Matter.
So how was A Bit of Chiptune born, and then how did it kind of evolve to like the amazing net label that it is and event organizer that it is today?
Yeah, so A Bit of Chiptune started out as a podcast, which I find funny because this is a very flipped scenario here. And we basically wanted me and Tris, who's a wonderful chiptune artist and guitarist who should be booked at many shows. We started a podcast called A Bit of Chiptune. We were both from a group called Real Family Tracker Hours. And what we wanted to do was to, I guess, just talk to people about chiptune, because we were thinking about how you barely actually like hear people. You mostly like see them talking about it, or you have all these like different group chats or whatever, but you barely actually get to have like a conversation with your voice. So you're going to these shows. And I guess the second thing that we really cared about was that we wanted to include people who traditionally wouldn't be included in those conversations, including people who aren't necessarily super involved in chiptune, but nonetheless like are really knowledgeable about like a different like social or technical topic that's relevant in some way.
Did you kind of like get into the chiptune scene first, or did the A Bit of Chiptune podcast lead you into the chiptune scene?
The Bit of Chiptune podcast definitely led me into the chiptune scene. Real Family Tracker Hours was a very kind of secluded little group of people. Honestly, I think that it could have deserved a little bit more attention in the chiptune scene, but overall, like those two, what we know of as the chiptune scene was separate to it.
So when we were talking a little bit before, you had said that you felt like when you were being introduced to the chiptune scene, you were fed a narrative that the medium was much more open to queer and trans and people of color and all marginalized groups. And then when you got there, you realized that maybe it wasn't what you had been fed. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. So during the A Bit of Chiptune podcast, I started talking to just some like major organizers, specifically like surrounding Chiplin, and they basically put a lot of emphasis on how the community was incredibly inclusive and incredibly hospitable to like trans people and people of color. But like if you look at the historical MagFest lineups, it sort of is a little bit weird that the lineups look so similar across the years.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of introduced to chiptune and continue to operate in Discord. When I visited the Discord chats of various communities, I very quickly saw that there were obstacles and barriers kind of unique to especially trans people, women, that weren't really being addressed, which largely involved the being permissive of people who weren't so great for those groups.
Why do you think the people that were telling you about how open it was, why do you think they felt like that originally?
I'm admittedly specifically talking about Brandon here because Brandon came onto the podcast and like sort of introduced me to the chiptune scene.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it was a very great conversation. And basically, I imagine from his perspective, he had a fair number of writers, and it was at least like aware that there were trans people in chiptune, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that if you aren't trans, or if you aren't a woman, or if you're white, or especially if you're all of those things at once, it can be difficult to identify issues on your own. And if the way that chiptune was set up, it was a little bit difficult to voice criticisms as a woman and be heard.
What did you learn from a bit of chiptune?
I learned so much. Well, I mean, I was a clueless, 17, 18-year-old, like, who had never really been involved with chiptune. So it was just so much like a wealth of knowledge, just like everywhere talking.
Nice.
And I do love talking to people and listening to people and just responding to their stories so much.
was a bit of chiptune like before, when Chipwin was like an active organization, and what is it like now that it's kind of like an archived organization?
Yeah, so quick rundown. 2018, that was when we started the podcast. December of 2018, and then into 2019 especially, we started releasing album after album after album, which was compilation albums of because the people who were our audience made music and they were interested in doing that, and I thought it was a really cool idea. So yeah, 2019 was pretty defined by that at first. And then sometime after February of 2019, we became more advocates for diversity than we had previously. After identifying just some strange happenings in the scene that like we didn't want to emulate in our own community.
What did you see that was going on in other chiptune organizations that you didn't want to emulate for a bit of chiptune?
So as I mentioned before, permissiveness. Specifically, we didn't want to tolerate intolerance in terms of if this person is explicitly homophobic, we don't want them in our community. And we're going to take action on that because by allowing somebody like that in our community to just kind of be that way, it does more harm than good and actually causes more people to leave.
Right.
If we were to just be like, no, we don't.
That's so important because I see like I don't know like my Twitter feed when I see like chiptune related events, you know, like the drama in quotation marks, you know, when I see that, it's like it comes from inaction, like somebody didn't address something and now 4 to 10 years later we're saying why wasn't this addressed, and like we're dealing with the consequences of it not being addressed at the time. So have you had to deal with a situation that you needed to address, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, nothing particular comes to mind that like I didn't address right away. I think like there were times when it took a little bit longer than we should have to like ban someone, but that was usually because like we needed to do some investigating before making that call. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's just important. It's just sort of like a daily, like if this person is very clearly like doing something that we're not okay with, then like we want to go to them right away and like say something about that. I guess one thing that happened in our community that I don't imagine happening in a lot of the groups that I'm referring to when I talk about passivity, which is that somebody entered one of our spaces and immediately a bunch of people came to us and told us that like, hey, this person is like openly non-binary phobic, but they had not like expressed that immediately in our space, but we heard from a ton of people that was the situation. So what I did was I went directly to this person, and without revealing anybody's names, I just kind of was like, hey, this is the situation. I want to talk to you about it. And during that conversation, this person who happens to play a big part in running a pretty large net label basically like did express non-binary phobia like during the conversation. Yep. I think specifically what happened was they said, I'm not non-binary phobic, but I have a right to my opinion, and I have a right to think the way that I do about non-binary people, just as they have very strong opinions against, like, on me, with a kind of like exclamation points here and there. And I was like, okay, I can see what's going on here. And then, of course, like other people who are genderqueer, like also provided some other examples. And I was just like, okay, this makes sense. I later having a conversation with somebody else, I learned that person also like only uses 4chan as their social media. And I was like,
nice.
Oh, this makes a little bit of sense.
Maybe that person was not aware of your platform, but why would that person want to join a bit of chiptune if they felt a certain way about non-binary people?
Right. So this was somewhat recent. This was right after we announced the Infinite Lives 2020. So we announced that we were going to run a bunch of chiptune shows, and that just means that we're getting attention. And this person who runs in that label sees that and thinks, oh, I should go to this community. They seem relevant to the chiptune scene, which is where I operate and have power. So I should like be a bit chummy with these people. And then they came in and we looked into it and we were like, no.
That's funny, but that's interesting because I try and work in like a music business platform, and if you're trying to be chummy with a queer atmosphere, don't go in there and start contrasting yourself with the atmosphere, especially if it sounds like that person was trying to do business or like do networking or something like that.
It's hard to say.
It is hard to say. Yeah. Have you had other backlash from a bit of chiptune and the bit of chiptunes platform?
Yes, mostly after we released our statement on Chipwin, and after at least I was like fairly supportive of the woman and open about the situation with James York, who runs Chipbeats. A lot of people came to me and other people with like slurs and name calling and just ideas of like what our agenda was that wasn't accurate and things like that. Just a lot of hurtful words, and also a lot of like threats to. I think I mentioned this before, but like somebody hacked, or at least tried to hack into a bunch of our accounts. At least according to them, they called me a fascist, communist, anarchist who's ruining chiptune, and then they tried to invoke a raid on our server by like providing the Discord link into our space and saying, "Hey, well, let's show these people what we're all about." And I think it was like linked to a bunch of like openly fascist people. So yeah, we had to close down our community. It's still like kind of closed. It'll reopen like more publicly in a couple of weeks. But yeah, people just kind of hated us after the events of like a month or two ago.
That is so weird. When I don't know, it's like I love chiptune obviously, but part of me is like, oh, it's a cute little thing associated with Mega Man 2. And then when we start throwing around words like anarchy, fascism, it's like, what are these words doing in this cute little music genre?
I don't know. Sometimes I don't know why people are using those words in certain contexts. I think they do apply when the people are in fact acting that way or are being that way. I don't know. At the end of the day, like chiptune is like also, it isn't just an aesthetic or a music genre, but it's also people. And with people come all of those ideas, and with people just comes anything associated with people, and we have to take that into consideration as seriously, if not more seriously, than the music itself.
You had said that people thought that you had some kind of agenda. What did they think? What did they think you were trying to do?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned, a lot of people had a lot of ideas, but I think the one most unique to a bit of chiptune was that we were trying to basically take down a big chiptune organization and then like bring everybody into our own, which in my opinion is very like dismissive of what I was trying to say, especially considering that like we haven't been promoting our spaces all that much aside from the Infinite Live shows, which yeah, you got to promote your shows. But I definitely did not see being frank about a situation that many people were misinformed about as us trying to just direct people at our community and become popular.
Yeah.
Especially like honestly, when I did the long thread that right before Chipwin kind of evaporated, I didn't expect that to happen at all. Honestly, like everybody in this sort of higher up staff area was pretty afraid, honestly. Like we all believed in what we were saying, but we were scared of the repercussions of saying that.
What was in your statement? What did you say?
My statement was pretty reflective of what I thought, so it's sort of just all in one. First thing, Brandon, the leader of Chipwin, called for a bunch of women, specifically Chipsel, Rainbow Trash, and Marie, to be basically kicked from their community. And that was because of their criticisms of their community. And their criticisms were that Chipwin was making it difficult for diverse artists to thrive because of their lineups and because of their culture. And also that Chipwin was being incredibly unfair to artists because of their like constant, instead of like their constant kind of directing people towards their own community, and rather than directing people towards the artist necessarily as much as they could be at the very least. And second, which I think is kind of a bit more relevant, they weren't paying anyone. Like they weren't paying the writers, they weren't paying the musicians, and this community was getting like thousands and thousands of dollars every year from compilations and Patreon. So we had to raise an eyebrow and ask, well, where is all that money going? Because nobody we spoke to knew, and nobody who we knew working for Chipwin saw a dime of that. Yep.
Well, you raised a lot. A bit of chiptune raises a lot of money too. Where does all your money go?
Well, as you know, and the Infinite Lives shows all goes 50-50 to the Black Lives Matter organizations and to the various artists who are playing. We don't have a full exact number for how much each artist is getting yet because money's still going in. But the estimate is just like something over $100 per artist, and there are about 32 artists. And then again, each time we have a show, we donate something over $600 to the Black Lives Matter organization. And before that, it was mostly like commissioning artists for the album covers and such. But I will say that I spent a lot of my own money more than I didn't earn anything from it. I was making loss. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, I totally know how you feel. I'm like, we were talking a little bit before because I help book Boston 8-bit shows, and I've been able to, going back to like the meme, I've been trying to I very much identify with that meme because I've been trying to do everything that all those captaineers, I forget what they're called, but the captain's kids are trying to do what each one represents. Yeah, so I've been able to do a lot of those, but I basically pay to do that. Like I lose. Oh, I don't lose. I pay for it. So you've been helping me trying to figure out how we can do that and like how we can accomplish all those things and not lose out on all that money that I might need for rent.
Yeah, no, your wallet's important. Like, I mean, that's I think that's natural for any movement to at least have a period like that. I would imagine as long as like you're very open and transparent and you build a following, that you'll gradually get to a good place.
I hope
but
so.
Yeah, I hope so too. Like, you definitely deserve it.
I get really I don't really know Brandon that well, but I get nervous about him because on Geek Beat Radio, which is like a 24/7 chiptune nerd radio here in Boston, Brandon actually used to have a podcast called Brandon Talks, where he would talk about like staying well and like his mental health, and he identified that he had some mental health, which people should listen to. I think that podcast is still up on geekyradio.com. And I get really nervous about Brandon too. I have more sympathy for like Brandon than someone like James York. Do you think?
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Do you think we're kicking a dead horse when we talk about chiptune win? And should we just let it die now?
I think that it's important to keep having conversations surrounding what Chipwin did and how we can do better now that it's not there, because I am personally very worried about what's next in chiptune. And I think a lot of people right now are really worried about something essentially becoming what Chipwin was. And personally, because of the way that the messages were being told, which was primarily due to myself through a large organization, the well-known Oracle, who's very involved with Chipwin and is a white dude, and Chipsel, who's one of the biggest artists in chiptune. Because those are the people who are leading the conversations, I'm worried that in the future people will continue to not listen to people who don't have that status. And I think it's important to keep in mind what happened with Chipwin and to not repeat that, because I'm worried that the structures that exist now and the attitudes that exist now can cause us to go back to it.
So it sounds like we have two paths here. We can listen to people or we can not listen to people. And so what do you think the future of chiptune looks like in both of those paths?
If we aren't listening to women, we're going to get more people like James York, who have high status in chiptune, who are known among women to like grope people at shows, and those stories just don't get told because people are more worried about keeping those who are high up, maintaining that status, than listening to people who don't have that status. And I think that, and as sad as it can be sometimes, I think that it's important that people without status be heard, even if it means exposing some not so pretty parts of chiptune.
That kind of reminds me of something Rainbow Trash said a few weeks ago. She said, maybe this isn't verbatim, but she was like, I cannot iterate how important it is to book music you think is bad.
Oh, I knew it. Yeah, the moment you started that, I was like, oh, I remember this too. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I haven't booked artists who I think are bad at music, but it's not like I'm looking for any particular kind of music when I'm booking. And I think that it's important to not only consider the music when you are booking. I think right now, people who are in chiptune and people who are running chiptune need to evaluate who they are and what their identities are beyond just good music. Because the reasons that a chiptune label is successful, at least I believe, aren't just limited to how good the music they're releasing is or how often you're releasing music. Those things are incredibly important, and everyone I book for the Infinite live streams, for example, are wonderful chiptune artists who I love to hear. But like other things go into that, which is, are they good people? Do they have like good messages? In what ways have they been represented in the past? We're intentionally like representing artists that haven't been represented in the past to an extreme degree. For example, I remember when I went to MagFest, there were some really great artists that were put up in the open mic, for example, but to my knowledge, they had never actually been on stage. And it was also weird to me because like a lot of those people were people of color who were incredibly talented, and I was like, wow, I can't believe these people didn't get on the stage. And like a lot of them were volunteers, so they were incredibly active in the chiptune community.
Yeah.
You know, their names weren't on posters, and I want that to change.
Well, so you brought up like MagFest. So I know that MagFest, like you kind of submit your music and they go with what they think is best. What do you think about the kind of counterpoint to that in when people are booking shows and like filling compilations and they don't necessarily know all the artists. What do you think of the counter argument that when they're listening to music, they don't know who they're booking? They don't know if they're gay or straight or black or white. They just pick what they like.
You use the example of MagFest, so I'm going to run with that just a little bit and say that when you look at all of the previous MagFest lineups and you see that they're homogenous and like people are saying everybody looks the same, so I'm going to say that, though I haven't looked. Then the people who are part of the LGBT plus community and people of color aren't going to feel confident in submitting work. So that's the first thing. Second thing, if you are MagFest, then you should have an idea of who the artists are in chiptune. At that point, I think that if like MagFest is one of the biggest chiptune events of the year, I mean, at least in my opinion. And I think that if you're running that, you should be in a position where you know something about the artist that you're booking to play.
If you were booking MagFest, how would you try and book it?
I mean, I'm already booking Infinite Lives. I mean, I can talk about how that goes. I don't really know how it works in MagFest, but
that'd be good. Yeah. So how do you?
I also did book. Wait, I did book for MagFest. I had the abitofchiptune.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. I mean, in that case, I was meant to represent a bit of chiptune, so I picked out a bunch of people who were involved with the community and somebody who, since we're largely an LGBTQI plus community, I also booked a queer chiptune artist whose music I thought was the most phenomenal thing I heard ever. But and for Infinite Lives, we did something similar. We looked at like way more artists than we could ever book, and we considered them and looked into them and kind of like saw their brand as well as their music. And it was, if we thought that their music was dope and that like who they are as a person was awesome, then they were heavily considered for the position. To clarify, we didn't have any each lineup must have X amount of women or X amount of people of color, or like we didn't have anything like that. It ended up being that way because of the vast amount of people we were looking at and like what we thought was really good. I think that the idea that you have to approach diversity inorganically is just wrong because of experiences like those where we were just like, yeah, this music is great. Let's like put them on. Like that's all we did. That's really it. And we ended up having like shows that were like, I think the last show was like mostly trans people. Yeah. And then other shows were like, I think that there was a person of color in like one or two or more in every single one of the shows that we played. Yeah. At least two in each of the shows that we ran. And that wasn't something we were really keeping track of. It's just what ended up happening because we knew what we were going for, and we knew that we wanted to book talent, and we knew who the artists were, and it just worked out that way.
That's so funny that for Boston 8-Bit, like this upcoming show, we have Gigi Sokolov, who's trans. We have the Unicorn Princess, who's a Boston female chiptune artist who plays guitar. And we have Rainbow Trash. And we have D&D Sluggers, who's a black dude from North Carolina, I think, who's also awesome. And then we also have Neon Death Cat on visuals. So,
what a good lineup.
I know. And it just like happened, like it literally just happened because like I talked to Rainbow Trash like a few weeks ago, and then I was talking to Neon Death Cat, and the Unicorn Princess is from Boston, and somebody else from D. So it just happened, but like I was talking to one of the other organizers, and it's just like, are we looking like we're being performative by not booking a white cis dude?
Oh man. The token white cis dude.
I know.
Oh man. I think wow. No, for sure. Like the Damn That's Good album, that their last album, we received, that was submission based, and we received mostly like queer artists and who submitted their tracks, and we just accepted all of those, and we were like, oh damn, this is like a very queer album, so it's like totally organic. That's so hilarious, the idea of like needing a token cis dude to make it look like you're not performing. That's so profound. Cool. So we're back for context. We just had a little break, a little bit of a precaution. And so during that time, I was thinking about what we were saying, and I just really want to briefly give a shout out to Chiptunes for Autism, just because they're also doing we take just about everybody who submits. They're also just doing some really amazing things. Their last albums are all about just like sensory, like how people with autism are often experience simulation and sensory experiences in different ways. So they've got like two-sided albums with like sensory chill and sensory fire. And it's just a really cool thing. I was just thinking about them. And the other thing I was thinking about was just on the topic of tokenism. You know, aside from the jokes, I'm kind of curious what you think about this. And you've talked about it on the show before, but like, do you think tokenism exists in chiptune? And
I definitely think tokenism exists in chiptune, and sometimes I find myself even like trying subconsciously, and then later I realize it. Sometimes I literally will like slip in my LGBT status because like sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe they'll book me for diversity or something like that. You know, and I won't realize it at the time, but later I'm like, did I do that?
Right. Honestly, I've also seen people do that when they're like kind of asking or applying for a position. Like diversity is important, but you don't have to, like your decisions that you make shouldn't be based on that necessarily.
Right, exactly.
Like that should not be the crossover factor for sure. But yeah, I understand. I really understand that. I understand why you would do something like that. And I think that it's because of a lot of issues in chiptune. So I was thinking about how you were having a conversation with Remote Trash about, I think it was like Chipsel and the situation with that, where I feel terrible. I don't really know how to pronounce the label's name, but basically the label had an all-male white lineup, and people were like, hey, that's like not great. And then sort of like the day later, they asked Chipsel, the kind of lead woman chiptune artist, to play for them. And I don't know, I think that's a pretty kind of specific example of tokenism. And I think Chipsel was called out kind of for accepting that position. Yeah, I think it's important when you're being accepted to like be kind of like, hey, so like who else is playing? And sort of like look into what the organization is all about and its history. Honestly, like talking with Chipsel and seeing how Chipsel responded to that, I think that like seeing the way that she behaved is almost kind of like the golden way to react when you're called out. Right. Because after she got really involved with the messages and listening and like criticizing. She was one of the names that Brandon called to be kicked specifically for her like questioning the exclusivity contracts and the lack of payments, which she and also I believe are a bit forget the word. Do you got it? Or no? Exploitative of more than a bit. And and I think what she did also was when she was first sort of told and called out, something that she decided to do after the initial like, oh goodness, she like stepped away, logged off, and honestly had a good frank thought about what was going on.
That is so important. I mean, like, I don't doubt that everybody will be called out at some point, and you need to know how to react when you're the one who is not helping like progress a situation. Yeah, reacting is so much more important than like the call out charge, I think.
We all make mistakes, and something that should not be underrated is how you respond to people identifying that you're doing something wrong. I think chiefly that was kind of the issue. Like we wouldn't have released a big statement on Chipwin if Chipwin responded to the criticisms that were sent privately in a reasonable way. I don't know. I've been in positions that were kind of like, oh gosh, that was not the best call. And I think recognizing that and like displaying that you understand why that was not the best call, as well as like, I guess something that I see a lot is people responding to, I guess, call outs. And I feel weird about the word call out, but I don't have a good substitute. But they went to it by immediately defending themselves and sort of focusing the conversation around them not being that, or if they do sort of own up to it, they don't display like why it was wrong. And if they do display why it was wrong, they often don't do anything about it that is of disbenefit for them. Like, I see a lot of the responses to people saying, hey, you need to do better, or this thing that you did was messed up. Their responses in a way that doesn't disbenefit them in any way, or that only benefits them, if that makes sense.
And to be like open about it. So like DJ Cutman was being called out about some stuff.
Right.
And like, to me, it's not, there's a certain James York line where it's like, oh, no, like, no way. But like Cutman, the charge that he's, dealing with is not that line. It's way before that. He just like, he might have dropped a slur, and which is bad. Of course it's bad. In his statement, he was like, if anyone has a problem with me, let me know. And it's like, well, we all know what you did. Like, we all know. So instead of waiting for somebody to say that, just say it yourself. Like, especially if you're going to bring it to Twitter like that,
I gotta say, actually, I'm fairly involved with that.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, because it was one of the Infinite Live shows that, like, it is fresh, and I'm probably not going. I'm not gonna like take any huge sides on this or like say too much. But it wasn't my call, but one of the moderators saw that he entered the stream and made the decision to kick Cutman, according to them, because of so a situation, I think, like with either defending or telling other people to not talk about a situation with like Grindcraft, or him saying that slur according to that allegation, which in my opinion, I believe that it's important that we take those seriously, because someone who says something like that has nothing to gain and only things to lose by saying something like that. And finally, just because a lot of queer people who are in our spaces felt uncomfortable. In fact, a lot of the people performing on that stream were uncomfortable with him and said afterwards, like, to me, that like, if Cutman were there, then I would have been uncomfortable.
Wow.
I had a very civil and productive conversation with Cutman, and I do want Cutman to be treated fairly, and I am still in the process of kind of looking into what happened, but I want to do that, of course, without ignoring queer voices. I'm a little bit annoyed with the people who are responding to his taking it to Twitter by saying, "Oh, this is cancel culture," because we didn't even say anything about it. We just like silently I had a very civil conversation with him directly after. In fact, he put out 2 Twitter posts. One of them was deleted, but the initial Twitter post said, "Oh, I was just kicked off of a bit of chiptune." And a bit of chiptune has about under like a 30th of his following, and I think like saying something like that out of context is like, Cutman kind of like this following is huge. Game Chops is like a big thing. It was honestly kind of like terrifying to like see something with like over 30 times as much of a following and like a lot of history just sort of like, yo, this like super small organization like did a thing that was I mean, like, credit where credit is due. Cutman donated to the stream, and when given the private opportunity to like have that money refunded, which was like no small sum, like he said, no, you can keep it. Like, I do believe in what you're doing, and I believe in the charities you're donating to, and so on. And then he didn't bring attention to that. So like, it's a very nuanced situation, and I think that like the course of events moving forward are really going to like define what happens next.
So, I mean, I think it's a lot easier if it's hypothetical, but let's say I come up to you and I'm like, Cass, you used to drop the F-bomb all the time around me. That pisses me off. And I don't want you to play the Boston 8-Bit show, and I'm sorry. So how would you handle that? How do you handle that situation?
I mean, obviously, if I did it, I would like immediately own up to it. I would have owned up to it probably way before you like said it. But if I didn't do it, that's a good spicy question. I have no idea what I would do, honestly. I mean, we did talk about like Chipsel, and I mean, I think that I would first want to have like a conversation with you, because you like started the conversation starting with me. I'd of course be respectful if you didn't want to talk to me after that. I think like something that I spoke to Chipsel about recently was like, a good idea is to just like log off and like think about why everything that is happening, and come back, and hopefully come back with something like productive to say recognize why that is or would be an issue, and hopefully offer some vulnerability that like isn't necessarily like something that would help you.
Right. I think vulnerability, I don't like that word. I don't know why. Maybe because it makes me vulnerable to like the word vulnerability. But vulnerability is really important to just be like, it's the opposite of being like, I know everything. Because, people will humanize you if you show humanity. You would kind of said like in Cutman's thread, where for context for listeners, like in my mind, you should see it for yourself, but in my mind, he said that these statements were not true. And then you had brought up that a lot of people started saying that what was going on was cancel culture. So why did you not like what they said, and is it cancel culture to ask Cutman to not participate in a show?
I think that honestly, I'm kind of frustrated by the way that like cancel culture is framed at times, but I think that specifically silently removing someone from a show and then talking to them privately about it because the majority of the people present aren't comfortable with that person in the space is not what it's not what people describe as cancel culture. Cancel culture, in the eyes of the people who are saying that it is cancel culture, I would hope, or I don't even know, but like it's not like we're trying to. It's not like we like went on Twitter and wrote out like a super long thread like we did with Chipwin, like specifically bashing on this one dude. We handled it as silently and as transparently with the person who was kicked as we could.
What I wanted to ask you as a cis person is, what is it to be trans, or more specifically, what is your experience being trans?
My experience with being trans, I personally knew from a very young age, which is honestly kind of, I didn't know I was trans, but I knew something was up. And that's not something that everybody knows. But I think like when I was starting puberty, like I think the signs started getting like more and more in my face. And then by the time I was like nearing adulthood, or by the time I was like in the 15 to 18 range, like it was becoming really unavoidable. So even though like a lot of my classmates were like openly transphobic and they continued to like harass me about it after I was starting to get more and more out, I like just kind of needed to, like take steps like changing my name and just taking all this different steps that I needed to do in order to transition into a more authentic me. And I guess in the larger picture of like how the world is affecting me right now, I mean, there are a lot of people in chiptune who like who have in the past done things like tried to convince other people that they shouldn't be transitioning. And I think that that kind of comes in handy as someone as a trans person. Like I can recognize that as problematic, even though I don't think you need to be trans to understand that how problematic that is. At least it's like not a thing that I have to look into too much. The world at large is kind of just constantly like reminding me that I am trans. So it becomes like such a part of my life just because of that. And there are just so many like, laws about that like just in America right now that like affect trans people in ways that don't affect other people. Like we talked about how much I've been traveling recently. Like just about every time I go in the airport, I get stopped at security. And the reason I get stopped at security is because of just like my hormone makeup and the clothes that I'm wearing, like make it so that, did you know that they like push a button that like if they identify you as male, then they press one button, and if they identify you as female, they press another button?
At the airport?
Yeah, and then it scans differently when you go through the whole form. Yeah, they all there, and it's always either my chest or like my lower area. And like I don't know, it doesn't matter what button they press, either way it's wrong. And I always just get stopped for that reason. I'm a whiz at like taking all the things out of my bag that can't be in there, but I'm always stopped anyways, just for that reason. That's like definitely one of the smaller things, but I I don't know why I focused in on that so much, but yeah, things like that, just like here and there almost every day.
So like if I'm in a dangerous situation where I know that my LGBT status will put me in danger, I'm super passable. I'm masked. I'm like white. I don't have to talk. I don't have to do anything, and I'm tall. Is there a situation where you needed to be passable because you were scared of your safety? And how did you handle that?
I mean, it's weird because you never know if someone's going to be mad, or I don't know, like even in online spaces, if you're in a group chat, like it's not necessarily dangerous, but it's very like difficult when you get onto a group chat and then if you try to present yourself as like them, but you have my voice, that someone's just going to like shit on you for that and basically try to like make you leave or like try to like pull a joke that's not funny. And I think that happens so often that it's just much easier for me to like be as quiet as possible about being trans. Like if I'm out, then there is a big temptation to be as quiet as possible about being trans. And it's so frustrating because like, like trans people who aren't accepted and who don't present the way that they authentically are, the suicide rates are really high. And that's not just like numbers. I've also like personally experienced like a lot of just like social dysphoria. So like trying to like pass one way or another is incredibly frustrating and draining and like,
Yeah.
But there's not really a time when it's not beneficial because everybody has an opinion about trans people and a good portion of people don't have good opinions.
What have you learned being trans?
Well, I've learned a lot about endocrinology. Sorry, that's like hormone stuff.
Oh no, tell me. I don't know.
No. That's I'm just like that's like a very concrete thing that I know a lot more about because of being trans, like just medical stuff in general. Like, oh yes, bodies respond this way. There's a lot of misinformation about there. Like people frame it as a lot more dangerous than it is, but it really is just not. I mean, I know a lot more about trans politics. It's kind of unavoidable, which I hate that I have to say the word trans politics, but like trans people are currently not allowed to serve in the military unless you like pass like 3 different things that apply to like 99% of trans people. And, like I think recently somebody basically was trying to make it so that doctors were perfectly permitted to discriminate on like gender and against trans people, which is like frustrating. Like, why would you do that? Like, what's the benefit of something like that?
I don't know.
But fortunately, that was not passed. I mean, like, along with this whole Black Lives Matter movement, like what is it? The for like Black trans women, like the life expectancy is like 20 something. Like, it's just it's so much. And I think, like, as a trans person, you just learn that you have to be aware of that to some extent, or at least like it's in your face. Like, if you're trans, then the news outlets that represent you only report and like rightfully report because this is what's going on in the world. This terrible things towards trans people.
Why do you think people get so offended at the idea of transness?
It makes people uncomfortable because there's just so much like social structure when it comes to male and female, and a lot of people's understanding of the world falls under that. I think the chief thing that leads to a lot of people being transphobic, they say that it's like free speech and such, but like they want proof. They want trans people to prove that they are who they are. And it's like it's weird and exhausting and frustrating as heck, and at many times also like pushes out a lot of different trans experiences when you try to justify the like metaphysics side of being trans, because like trans people are just like constantly asked to like prove that they are trans, and it's so difficult because like is it the hormones, is it like surgery that makes you like the gender that you are? I mean, it's none of these things. Is it like a certain like neuroscience like thing that you have to identify in your brain? Is it like after you pass? Is it like at what point is someone trans is like sort of the question, and many people will say never, but you know, a lot of other people are going to like say otherwise. And just there aren't a lot of people who are willing to accept trans people as the gender who they are because of they have some kind of metaphysical argument where trans people they expect trans people to prove their transness from one means or another, which is why you see a lot of people who are against trans people saying facts and logic.
We were kind of talking about like how the gay experience is complicated, but I can also like just bring it down to one sentence where it's like, I'm a man who's attracted to men. So if I was like showing people, like if I could pass that feeling on to people to show them like, oh, this is what being attracted to blah, blah, blah. Like if I could show them my experience by just like showing them that. If you can make a cis person feel something that you're feeling to make them know what it's like being trans, what would you show them?
I think I'll go with the men in this. If I wanted to show like a dude sort of immediately, I would have to like put them in a dress and then like make them think that they're on like some sort of like hormonal or otherwise like thing that's going to make their body like womanly, and then immediately they'll realize like, oh shit, this is exactly what dysphoria feels like. And I don't know, I think it's hard because I think that a cis person can understand abstractly that a trans person might want to be a different gender or doesn't feel right in their body or in their social standing, or if for whatever reason, they might understand that, but they won't, like a cis person will never experience dysphoria, and dysphoria isn't necessary for being trans, but like I think that's an example of something that like a cis person just doesn't experience, that you can't just like flip it. It's just not something that they'll know and empathize with.
This might be the same question. What is like something that me being a gay person, like my biggest ally, something they'll never be able to know is that I feel like no matter where I am, people, even my best friends, still kind of treat me like an F slur. Like, what's that?
If you're comfortable,
oh sure.
Elaborating, what do you mean?
Oh, this is a great example. Okay, so I was working at a restaurant. Like I anatomically have like a unit that sticks out, and excuse the vulgarity, but so like someone literally came up to me and like said to me, "You don't deserve the size of your unit," and you know it was a much less polite way of saying that. It was like,
sorry.
Yeah. It was like, what are you talking about? Or like I get like a lot of I'm just like talking about all sorts of different experiences, but like I get like a lot of older men who might identify as straight who have come on to me thinking, and like that in my mind they think like I'm so desperate, or like that I'm just attracted to all men, that I would do them this favor of like giving them a homosexual experience. Or like if I'm in, like, I never try and be like managerial, but like at my job I am a manager. I just have to work harder for like what I'm trying to manage to go through.
I mean, we know that back in September, Clover released something fairly similar about Chipwin, and it got a lot of attention, but it didn't really have any results. And it just, again, like, it was a lot safer to have a white dude, like a huge chiptune person and an organization speaking up. It was like, frankly, like more effective than like a bunch of women and trans people speaking up, which is incredibly wrong and sad and frustrating.
Yeah.
But like, women and trans people have been speaking about those topics for years, specifically like those topics, and they've been vocal about it. Like, if you look at Rainbow Trash, if you look at Marie, they've been vocal about it for a very long time, and it wasn't until those groups said something and said something big that anything was really done about it. And it's just so sad.
Yeah. If Cutman said, I don't use the word faggot anymore, it's wrong, it would mean so much more than if I said, hey guys, please don't use the word faggot anymore. You know, it would just,
That's
like,
true.
you know what I mean?
I hate it. Yeah, I don't even have a response to that. Heck,
Me neither.
I'm just sorry for that the world is like this sometimes. Yeah. Did I tell you about the person who was like, oh, you and your T-slur friend are just ruining chiptune, just like always. Like we don't have the power to like pull like the homophobic F word or the transphobic T word on like other people. Like we don't have the power to do that to some like white guy. Like, there just isn't something of that magnitude. Like, anybody who does something like that is like using a power that they have that the other person just doesn't, because nobody can do something like that to that person. Yeah, so like I asked Rainbow Trash about sort of some of the things that she meant when she said that like chiptune is a queer genre, and we're probably going to talk more about that. But from my limited understanding, chiptune is a queer genre largely because you're taking things like the Game Boy is the best example that is made for and directed at like boys. Yeah, so you're taking things like the Game Boy, which is directed towards men and boys, and you're transforming it into something else. And that's like a pretty on the nose queer thing. And I also think that like chiptune definitely like is attractive to a lot of trans people. Some of it like I'm like, wow, I have no idea why so many trans people seem to like this, but okay, look at all this cool talent. But I don't know. Some theories that I have is the sort of childish aesthetics, or childlike aesthetics. Big distinction between like child-ish and childlike because chiptune is so sophisticated.
Yeah.
Allows a lot of trans people to like reclaim that side of who they are, who most trans people don't really get to experience to a degree of satisfaction. Do you have anything to add to that?
To queerness in chiptune. Queerness in chiptune. Well, I think it's really interesting because, like, I mean, I can only come at it from like the a gay point of view. But like a lot of the composers that we look at, which should be actually more varied, but you know how the patriarchy is. We look at white men composers, but a lot of them were gay or like in the closet, and I think like a lot of their music, I do think that like gayness comes in their music, you know, colorful, brightness, energy, you know,
Right.
love, experience. I do think that comes out in music. And
oh my goodness, yeah. No, just like when you think of chiptune and visuals for chiptune, like you think of like rainbows and hearts, and that's so gay.
yeah. It is. I mean,
it really is.
Yeah. And I didn't start this way with Triheart, but I mean, we didn't know what we were doing when we first started it. But like, I love using different colored hearts and like using queer colors and like, and we're queer band. Does your queerness come out or correlate with your music at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a bit. I think in some ways, I think that like just being trans, like something about that just makes me feel like I can just sort of like makes me like, oh yes, I am trans. Time to be really creative. I don't even know what it is. I don't know how to describe it, but like yes, I have battled the gender now to make polyrhythmic music. Like,
I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think more explicitly, like as someone who is autistic, that has like affected my music a little bit more because of the way that I experience like stimulation and like loud noises and like things like that. It very very directly affects the way that I like react to different sounds, and I would imagine that comes across in my music.
That's huge. Yeah. Now I'm going to listen to your music with a whole new set of ears.
Nice. Yeah.
So
I'm releasing a bunch of new stuff too, like later on. Just keep an eye out. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, better encapsulates that. But also, I think one thing that like being, I guess specifically like more woman or female that comes across in my music is I really love things that sound pretty. Like that's a bit of a gender stereotype, but it's so like I just really love making things pretty and like nice. And
do you do that through your music? Like, do you do it through melody, or like do you use it through instrumentation? How do you make your music sound pretty?
A little bit of both. I mean, I really love strings. I've been working with samples a lot, and like when I'm looking through different samples, I just look for like the prettiest sounds, things that like remind me of New York, because that's where I'm from. And Yeah, I don't know. If it makes me bounce and it sounds pretty, then I think I've done my job.
I love this. One thing you had kind of said was like, if you create an environment where queer people are welcome and feel like they have a stage, they'll flourish. And I want to know if you have seen generally or specifically like someone or a group of people flourish under a bit of chiptune.
Mm. I also want to do a little shout out to Magfest after this.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, if you listen to the entire Damn, That's Good album, that's like mostly non-binary and trans people. And if you look at the Infinite Lives, that's also like very inhabited by queer people and people of color, and they truly are just flourishing. And as I said before, like we aren't trying to like check mark how many people we are of a certain demographic. We're just like finding really good talent. And like if you give anyone a stage who is talented, flourish, and just historically that hasn't been followed through with. And I don't know, the Magfest example that I want to thank, because I think it's fun to have a specific example, but yeah, we had like pride flags sort of like hanging outside of the little Magfest stage. I think you were there, and I think you probably saw that. But yeah, it just made like a lot of people really comfortable with being on stage. And I saw a lot of like really amazing open mic performances by like trans girls and like just a lot of wonderful queer people.
Amazing.
Who felt like totally comfortable in the space because they knew that Glenn's great, was on board with just them being there, I guess.
Right.
Standing up for them as needed.
It's so interesting what like the smallest amount of representation like a flag can like invoke.
Yeah.
And like, yeah.
Yeah. I had a conversation with Glenn about them, and he said that there aren't a lot of people who won't cross that line, but there are people here who will not like cross the LGBT flags. And the flags are not only there to make people feel welcome, but it's also like, like we know that people who aren't cool with the flags won't come into the event.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, you know what? Where can people find you and Infinite Lives and a bit of chiptune?
Absolutely. So if you go to our website on abitofchiptune.com, you can find links to our Twitter and all kinds of other social media. You can find me on @Cuttlefish. And yeah, just if you go to abitofchiptune.com, you can find links to our music and everything else. Yeah, I mean, also, like, feel free to come to me and ask if you want to join the Discord, because we're in the process of opening it up again. You know, if you like the things that we said here, you are probably the kind of person who will fit in. So, yeah, go ahead. If you sat through this entire thing and you aren't fuming right now, then I think you you are welcome in the Discord. So just, like, reach out to me and I'll give you an invite.